Good morning, Gideon. We are on Kuf Aleph Kuf Beis Amud Aleph 102a, and we're at the last comment, with two more comments actually, from the Gemara on this discussion of Kuf Bet Amud Aleph. Yeah, so Kuf Beis with one dot.
Kuf Aleph Amud Bet, no?
What did I say? No, Kuf Beis Amud Aleph 102a. So it's Kuf Bet, and then one dot next to it. So yeah, the next page. So two more comments from the Gemara on this discussion of moving location while eating and thus ending the meal, or does it continue? And then we'll get to the Shulchan Aruch, which will give us clarity on all the details of this. And then the Gemara will get back to Kiddush and take some other tangents. So where are we? We are contesting the view of Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan is the minority view, which is that a person never requires to make a new bracha even if they change location. Rabbi Yochanan was the view, if you heard Kiddush in Shul, not only did you fulfill your obligation for Kiddush, even though you didn't eat in the spot of your Kiddush, that was our previous discussion. Not only that, but Rabbi Yochanan even argued that you don't have to make a new bracha hagafen when you get home, because the hagafen that you said amen to in Shul extends to your house, assuming you had in mind that you're going to go. Let's just assume that. But even though you're changing buildings, you're changing blocks, you're walking for 10 minutes, whatever it is, in his view, the bracha continues. And we challenge that based on the Mishnaic text. The Mishnaic text we introduced was a dispute between the sages and Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda was of the view that in order to consider your meal as having continued when you walk out, you're required to have someone sitting at the table. So if you walk out of the room, but someone's still at the table, then your meal is continuous. And when you come back, no reason to make a new bracha because someone was there continuing your meal. But if everybody walked out, then you'd have to make a benching, you'd make an after blessing when you walk out. When you come back in to continue, a new bracha as you continue. That was Rabbi Yehuda's view. The sages / Rav Chizda are of the view, right? The sages of the Mishnaic era and then Rav Chizda of the Gemara's era, their view is that even if everyone walked out, but if the halacha requires you to go back to that spot, then the meal is continued. So even though everybody emptied out, because the halacha anchors you to that spot, because halacha says, hey, come back and bench, so your meal isn't over. And therefore, you don't have to bench when you leave, and you don't have to make a new bracha when you come back. Yeah. So that Mishnah presented a challenge to Rabbi Yochanan's view, because Rabbi Yochanan was of the view that when you walk away, you don't need to make a new bracha, right? Ever. Whereas the sages, at least in our reading at the moment, their view is if you walked away from something that a halacha does not require you to come back, you're drinking tea and everybody walked away, the halacha doesn't require you to come back and do the after blessing. So in that case, the fact that you walked away is itself the end of your meal. And if you have to bench and then you have to make a new bracha when you come back. Whereas Rabbi Yochanan said you don't. And that's the challenge to Rabbi Yochanan's position. Even though we already refuted Rabbi Yochanan's position by invoking another text last week, nonetheless, the Gemara presents another challenge. The Gemara is going to defend Rabbi Yochanan's position, at least as far as this challenge goes. Then the Gemara is going to introduce a text that definitively supports Rav Chizda's view, which remains the halacha, and then we'll get to the Shulchan Aruch. So let's see. It's about a little below halfway. The line begins with the word maha. Maha nami tehei tihevi tiyufta. There's a little like circle, and then it says Amar Rabbi Yochanan. You see it?
Yeah.
Okay. So Amar Rabbi Yochanan would respond. Rabbi Yochanan is long past while we're having this conversation. Right? I mentioned before the Gemara is a conglomerate of conversations throughout the generations. So even though Rabbi Yochanan is a scholar of the Amoraic Gemara era, but he's from the early Gemara era. So later the redactors are having a conversation that happened about Rabbi Yochanan, which was a century ago or decades ago, whatever. So they are saying what Rabbi Yochanan would have said in his defense. Rabbi Yochanan could tell you as follows. Hu hadin, when the sages say that a person who walks away does not need to make a new bracha because his meal continues, We understood that to mean that that's only true if the halacha calls you back, because the halacha says you have to come back and bench. But Rabbi Yochanan would say, no, the sages actually mean that Rabbi Yochanan would say that the sages agree that even when you don't require to come back by halacha to bench in that spot, you still don't need to make a bracha. He's reinterpreting the sages. When the sages said that you walk away, you don't have to make a new bracha, which we understood to mean the reason is because the halacha calls you back. Rabbi Yochanan would say, no, it's even if the halacha doesn't call you back, when you walk away, you don't have to make a new bracha. Now, Had the Katani asked for the fact that the Mishnah says, Akru raglein. How did we know that the scenario of the sages was such that the halacha requires you to come back? There's two words. These words are Akru raglein. They uprooted their feet. When the scenario was described in this Mishnaic text, there was people sitting together to drink, and they uprooted their feet and walked out. From the fact that the halacha, from the text says they uprooted their feet, we inferred that that means the kind of thing that was permanent.
They weren't just snacking.
They weren't just snacking, they were permanent, which means the halacha requires them to come back, and that's why they're still anchored. So Rabbi Yochanan says, don't take those two words so seriously. Even though it says uprooted their feet, it doesn't mean that the halacha requires them to come back. It could be they were snacking and having a drink of water. So why put those words in? Says Rabbi Yochanan, to tell you the other view. We have a dispute here. The sages versus Rabbi Yehuda. The sages were of the view, you walk away, at least in Rabbi Yochanan's reading, you walk away, no new bracha. Doesn't matter what you're eating. But Rabbi Yehuda said, when you walk away, you do have to make a new bracha. Unless you leave someone behind. So it says Rabbi Yochanan, you know why the Mishnah described it as such that they were sitting permanently? To tell you that Rabbi Yehuda says, even if you're sitting permanently, you'll still need to have someone left behind. So these words that describe the scenario as them sitting permanently is not there to describe the sage's opinion. It's there to describe Rabbi Yehuda's opinion. Because the sages are actually of the view, no matter what you do, you don't have to make a new bracha, as per Rabbi Yochanan's reading. But Rabbi Yehuda is of the view that even if they were sitting permanently, you still have to leave someone behind. So this statement in the Mishnah, which says that they uprooted their feet, which indicates that they were sitting permanently, is not there to qualify the sage's view. Because the sage's view in Rabbi Yochanan's reading is, even if you don't have to come back, you don't need to make a new bracha. Those two words which describe them sitting permanently is there to qualify Rabbi Yehuda's view, that even if you're sitting permanently, if you walked away, you're not anchored unless you left someone behind. So this is how Rabbi Yochanan would defend himself against this text. So to reread that. As for the fact that the Mishnaic text invoked the words, they uprooted their feet, which seems to indicate that they were sitting permanently. This is not to qualify the sages, because the sages in Rabbi Yochanan's reading will say no matter what happens, you don't have to make a new bracha, even if you weren't sitting permanently. You're always allowed to walk around and extend your meal just by having it in mind, as Rabbi Yochanan's view. So why then describe it as uprooting their feet? Why describe it as a permanent sitting? To tell you how far Rabbi Yehuda takes his position. Even if, in Rabbi Yehuda's view, even if you were eating the kind of things that the halacha requires you to come back, nonetheless, in Rabbi Yehuda's view, taima, the reason why you would be allowed to not make a bracha because your meal continues, because you left some people behind. But if you didn't leave behind anyone, in Rabbi Yehuda's view, if they leave, you have to make a ton and bracha lemafreya, they have to make an after blessing. And when they return, ton and bracha lechatchila, they have to make a bracha to start again. Clear? This is Rabbi Yochanan's view. So there are two ways of understanding the dispute between the sages and Rabbi Yehuda. Yesterday, as per Rav Chizda, we understood the sages and Rabbi Yehuda disputing only with regard to the kinds of things that the halacha anchors you to come back. In Rav Chizda's view, the sages, Rabbi Yehuda, everybody agrees that if you're eating a snack, when you walk away, your meal's over, you got to make a new bracha. This question is, when the halacha anchors you, and the halacha says come back and sit down to bench, the sages say that's enough to make your meal continue, and the Buddha says you have to leave someone behind. Rabbi Yochanan says actually the dispute is in both cases. The dispute is in both cases. whether you're eating things that require you to come back, or whether you're eating things that are not required you to come back, the dispute persists. Sages say no new bracha when you walk away, even if you're eating a snack. Rabbi Yehuda says you always have to make a new bracha, even if you're not eating a snack, even if it's a permanent meal, you have to make a new bracha, unless you left someone behind. So these are two readings to the same dispute. Now, final comment from the Gemara on this discussion, which definitively supports the view of Rabbi Chizda that if you're eating only if you're eating a permanent meal, are you anchored to your spot? And therefore, if you're eating a permanent meal, when you walk away, no new bracha. But if you're eating a snack, when you walk away, the meal's over, you have to make a new bracha. The Gemara is going to bring Mishnaic text that supports that definitively, and then we'll get to the Shulchan Aruch. There's different ways of reading the text we're about to read. We're going with Rashi's reading. Tanya Kavasei de Rav Chizda. We have a Mishnaic text that supports Rav Chizda's view. The Mishnaic text reads, friends that were sitting together to drink wine. This word wine is the new proof. Are you sure you want to say something?
Oh yeah, sorry. Is this considered a meisvei then? This Mishnaic age text, or
a meisvei to Rabbi Yochanan's view?
Yeah, like support of Rav Chizda's view.
Yeah, it would be a meisvei is a challenge, so it would be a meisvei.
Oh, it's not a challenge, but it's in support of.
That's right. So it would be a meisvei to Rabbi Yochanan's view, but this would already be the third time we're doing that.
Okay,
right?
Thank you.
The second one we just defended, but this would be the third time.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
So the Mishnah text reads, Chavedim, friends, show you mesuvin that were settled, lishtois yayin, to drink wine. This word wine has been added now. Till now, the text read they were sitting and drinking or eating, and they uprooted their feet. So this description, uprooted their feet, led us to believe that we're talking about the kind of food that's permanent.
Doesn't
necessarily have to be. As Rabbi Yochanan pointed out, it could be just to make an inference. But this one says wine. Wine definitively is a halachic permanent drinking, because halacha requires you come back to the spot where you drank to bench. So that's why this becomes a definitive proof, as per Rashi's reading. There are other readings to this text which change the variant, but we're going with Rashi's. So friends were sitting to drink wine, and they uprooted their feet. They walked out. Nobody left behind. They all walked out. And they come back to their spot, and no need to make a new bracha, because they were drinking wine, and wine, the halacha requires that they come back to eat. Thus, the wine anchors them to their spot. Even if they walked away, they come back, no new bracha. So this is definitive proof for Rav Chizda's position. Okay. Now we get to the Shulchan Aruch.